So the next thing I want to talk about, guys, is the Zerg. The race in which, at least in StarCraft 2, has been an absolute dominant race. And it's brought up a lot of conversation within the community as well as between pro players as to the Zerg being the dominant race and this being a problem. So the big question is the Zerg at this point being the dominant race, and I don't think there's any debate about that, is that a problem for StarCraft 2? So let's talk about it. So guys, I think that the Zerg as a whole, and we can kind of, as we've looked through history as far as within the StarCraft 2 scene and esports in particular, we can see that, okay, over the course of the last few years now, we've seen Zerg win the World Championship at BlizzCon. We've also seen that many other tournaments are being won within StarCraft 2 by the Zerg race. Is it because a lot of the players, just more and more players are playing as Zerg, or is it just that Zerg is just that much better of a race than the other, than of course the Terran or the Protoss? And I gotta say, guys, to me it feels like the Zerg, maybe there's just a lot of different ways in which, you know, the players are able to utilize the Zerg units to obtain victory. But I really think that StarCraft 2 as a whole, overall, is pretty balanced between the three races. I just think it's the players that are playing as the Zerg are just that much better than the other players. So, like, just for example, if Cyril decided that he didn't want to play as the Zerg, he wanted to play as, say, the Terran or the Protoss, I think maybe he's not quite as dominant, but I still think that he would be very good with any of those races. It just comes down to, guys, is like the decision making that you're making throughout the course of a tournament, through the course of a game. And you know, it's like real-time chess, right? And in a way in which I just feel that the guys who are playing as the Terran or the Protoss, just sure, like they just clearly are not better than, you know, some of these other players, right? And I think if they were, we would be seeing more and more winners at some of these tournaments that aren't necessarily the Zerg race. I just think that Zerg is the dominant race right now because the best players are playing as the Zerg. And that's not taking anything away from the Protoss players, because there's been Protoss players that have gotten really close. There's been Terran players that have gotten really close. I feel that the Terran is probably the one that has had, you know, has been nerfed, and it feels like really the Terran has not won a BlizzCon since what? Probably Beyond, most likely. And the last time a Protoss player won, geez, I think it might have been even longer than that. I mean, it's been a while, it's felt like, since we've seen a Protoss player or a Terran player winning major tournaments. And BlizzCon obviously was the World Championship, like basically the Super Bowl of StarCraft. So obviously that's the biggest event of the year. And the past 3 years, we had Dark this year, we had Cyril last year, and Rogue the year before that. And it's basically been a lot of ZVZ matchups, right? Hasn't it all been ZVZ? I mean, it's just been crazy. You had Dark versus Raynor, and you know, lots of Zerg matchups. That's what we've been getting. And is it because Zerg's the dominant race? Or is it just that the players playing as the Zerg are just that much better than everybody else? And I just think that the players who are playing as the Zerg are better than everybody else. Now, that being said, I do think that it's not good for StarCraft. I think it's a problem for StarCraft. And I know the narratives that are out there right now, and some of them we're trying to kind of echo on our channel, right? We're trying to get a Dark versus Cyril matchup, like the battle for the greatest of all time kind of a matchup at, you know, the World Championships at IEM Katowice 2021. But here's the thing, is I do think it's a problem because when you don't have some form of like kind of some change, right? It just gets stale seeing the same race over and over again. And that's coming from a guy who plays as the Zerg. I love the Zerg and I love seeing the Zerg win. But at the same time, I would love to see a Terran player really be able to compete for major championships. Same with Protoss players as well. I want to see those races kind of really compete against the Zerg. because I think it's good for StarCraft as a whole, right? I mean, look, like think about football for a sec. When we think of football, we think of, and I'm talking American football here, when we think of football as a whole, you think of the New England Patriots and how they've just been dominant for many, many years. Well, it's not really good for football. It just isn't. Like, sure, the narratives around, are they going to continue their success? But at the same time, people want to see new teams get there. New fan bases want to see their teams get there. So, yeah, that all being said, guys, I think it would be really good for StarCraft if we had more players that are able, that play with different races, kind of really represent at the World Championships. I think it would be really good for StarCraft too to have a Terran player versus a Protoss player at IEM Katowice 2021 as the World Championship Grand Finals. I just think it would be good for StarCraft too. At the same time, I think that obviously having Cyril's dominance and Dark's dominance and Raynor being the upcoming, next player is really good for StarCraft too as an esport. I think it's really good for it to have those players, to see them go deep into tournaments and such. But I think really what it comes down to, guys, is this is kind of a call for those other players out there that play with the Terran and play with the Protoss. Look, like, it's good. You just, put in that work, put in that time, which I know a lot of them do. But if you want to see change at, the World Championships and even at tournaments throughout the course of the year, you've got to be, working harder than all these other guys. And we know that Cyril works really tough. We know Dark works hard. Raynor, these guys are grinders. And so at the end of the day, I believe it's actually just the players who are playing as the Zerg are just better than everybody else. Now, the Terran and the Protoss, maybe sure, they're it's not as balanced as it used to be. I just feel that that's kind of an excuse because I feel like it's pretty well balanced. It's just the Zerg is just becomes overwhelming if you let them, do specific things or, let them dictate the pace of the game. You got to be the one dictating the pace of the game at all times if you're a Terran or a Protoss player. In my opinion, if you want to obtain victory against some of these, the best Zerg players in the world. But that being said, guys, do you think it's a problem that the Zerg is pretty much the dominant race in StarCraft 2 esports at this point? I would love to hear from you guys. Do you think it's a problem? And do you think it's the Zerg itself that's just better than, a better race than the other two races? Or do you think it's the players playing the Zerg are just better than everybody else? Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below.